And welcome to Real Talk. We're doing a really special conversation today. Deputy or Chief Titus was not going to be a guest on the show, and I've decided that I'd reach out to him because he had a fantastic opportunity to speak up at Tallahassee, and I wanted to hit this topic anyway because as citizens, we've got to have clarity on every aspect of what's happening with the changes that are out there. And I thought with the great leadership that Chief Titus offers, he's got some really good, valuable insight, and hopefully some questions will come from this, and we can later on address them. I'm going to bring him on now and put him on the main screen. But hey, Chief, how you doing?
I'm good, John. Thank you so much for having me tonight and inviting me to speak. And I appreciate you adjusting your schedule a little bit, finding out that I was going to be out of town this Monday, which is when your normal live stream would be. So I know that we're going to set a couple of areas where people can write in questions to you, which we can answer later. And then I'll also reference they can send questions into the city of Northport, and we'll get answers for them based on our discussion tonight. But thank you so much for agreeing to inviting me on and agreeing to do this ahead of time so that we could get it out, since I'll be traveling next week. But thank you.
You know, and it was a special invite. This is normally this Monday would have been your normal monthly, and you had somebody else you wanted to get on. But this why is this topic so important to public safety?
Well, so obviously it's sparked some discussion in the community quite recently. I was up in Tallahassee a few days ago, and I went up there for the purpose of speaking to the Senate committee, which was meeting to discuss this. And then if this passed at the Senate committee level, it was going to then go to the Senate and the House for voting. And I heard some things in the beginning. There was, different amendments proposed. There were some pieces of legislation that were in there, but this was pushed forward pretty quickly. And I had some concerns, so I wanted to go up and hear the discussion, have the opportunity to speak. And I think some of the feedback that we've gotten, I think the voters think that I was trying to influence what they should vote. And what I was actually trying to do was trying to influence and ask the Senate committee to not pass it, and not forever, but not pass it without having some studies and some safeguards in place, because the legislation, there was no financial analysis on the impacts or the consequences of what this bill will do statewide. And because funding mechanisms for different dependent districts, independent districts, counties, and municipalities, it's going to impact all of them very differently across the state. And they just really don't have any idea what that is. And it's got pushed through, and now, it's been through, and so it's going to go to the voters. And so we just want to make sure that we educate them, and some of them know what the final language is, and let them vote. And we're not trying to advocate for or against what it is. Everybody's right to vote is theirs. We just want them to make sure that they have all the information and accurate information, because some of the things at the beginning when this bill was proposed, some of the language that was in there is no longer was not adopted. Some of those amendments were cut out. And so we want to make sure that everybody has that information and understands not only how it affects our community, but also affects other communities statewide.
My wife had mentioned that the former Commissioner Vanessa Carasone had made a statement on the taxes and how things are going to be handled, and that at some point you've got to take into consideration that a pool of money that's there right now that's being utilized doesn't get handed back to you. It just gets reformulated somewhere and calculated back out. Now that could take time. That could cause a lot of harm in the meantime. Can you kind of give an overview on your perspective from the chief side of things, because you're dealing with budgets and different things that you're responsible for? Can you talk a little bit about how, as it sits right now, how that's going to affect you?
There's some that is still yet to be determined as we go through the budget process. What I can tell you is when you look at some of the differences. So the initial discussions were that this was going to go straight to $250,000 homestead exemption. Now it's the first iteration is going to be $150,000 effective January 1st, 2027, and then January 1st, 2028 will go to a $250,000 homestead exemption. So for the city of Northport, what that means is that first iteration would be it's approximately a $8.8 million reduction to general fund revenues, and in the second year it's about $14.5 million reduction in revenues for general fund. And the current bill language, which is going to be voted on in November when it goes to vote a referendum, states that the language is actually a bit softened from what some of the original language was, where it really carved out and protected, public safety. But now it says ad valorem taxes are the primary funding source for public safety. And I think all governments would agree with that. That's one of the government's primary purposes. But it doesn't really go much beyond that. It says that ad valorem taxes need to go to public safety. Well, public safety costs more than what ad valorem taxes bring in. So the fiscal year 26 public safety budget, that includes police, fire, and emergency management, it's about $55 million. The ad valorem tax revenue is about $39 million. So there's obviously a difference there. And that's really looking at, and that's kind of what I wanted everybody to look at. So that difference in the first year of, $8+ million, that needs to come from somewhere else, because there's not enough tax revenues from ad valorem to cover all that. There already wasn't. So some of those other revenue sources that they look at with the city, they're restricted. Some of those things have to be spent for very specific things. So there's not a lot of extra money. So if you look at for the second year public safety funding, $55.1 million, that would be today's numbers minus ad valorem revenue, leaves 39.4. That's a difference of $15.7 million in year number two, 8.8 in year number one, 15.7 in year number two. And so where's that money going to come from? What are those things going to affect? We won't know really until the budget's formulated and until our obviously the city management team, the city manager's office, and all the directors will have some input in the finance department, but ultimately the decision makers, will be our elected officials that will make that decision on where those cuts come from. So we want to make sure that everybody's educated on what those dollar numbers are, and then make sure that they're present and advocate for the services, that they want to preserve in the city. And the city is going to have to show, where cuts are, if cuts are recommended, where they are, how that will affect services in the community. It's difficult for me to believe that there won't be some effect on public safety. I can tell you that we've cut our budgets pretty significantly as it is over the last number of years. Although they've gone up each year, it's been a little bit less, and we are still a growing community. So we are adding resources, adding stations at the same time as the market has been softening a little bit. The millage rate has been, kept flat. Our particular community, there's been a little bit of confusion, because when people look at their tax bill, they see a fire rescue assessment, and so they say, well, fire rescue, the assessments aren't affected. That's non-ad valorem. So they think it's not going to touch the fire department at all. And that's not true. The fire rescue assessment is only for the fire portion of our service. So emergency medical services, ALS care, all of our ambulance service, that's funded through the general fund. That's the other half of our budget. And it doesn't show on your tax bill specifically an EMS bill or an EMS portion. It's just figured into the ad valorem taxes. So, there's some information out there where people say, well, fire rescue won't be affected at all in our community. And we're not sure how it will be affected, because police, fire, the EMS portion of fire, and emergency management all come out of that general fund kind of piece of the pie. And so
does that include our 911 setup?
Not for the county, but it does for the police department. So the police department has their own dispatch center. So yes, absolutely, that's funded through ad valorem taxes. Now the county has 911 communications. That's also funded at the county level through ad valorem taxes. So I don't have the specific number. I want to say the county said in year number two, I want to say they were looking at $89 million in revenue reduction. So I'm sure that they're having a lot of the lot of the same conversations. And when they look at statewide and they put numbers out and they show how much the revenue has increased and what's happened over that period of time, one of the reasons I went and spoke to the Senate committee was because they're looking holistically statewide. And there may be some areas that are not making great use of that money. We've been pegged as second fastest growing residential community, I think 2 years out of the last 5 or 6. When you look at that, that has required the addition of public safety services as well as other parts of service from the government that are funded through ad valorem taxes, commensurate with that. And so the difficulty is when you cut that back again, it's where's that money going to be cut? And if the vote of referendum passes, we will do the will of the voters. One of the things I've always said as the fire chief is I think that we have a very, very, very good level of service for fire and EMS services in the city. I think we have a very good level of service for police, emergency management, all of those things. And my job is to advocate for that. And I think that our community enjoys that. If there are cuts that come to that, my job is to make sure everybody understands the consequence. But whatever, money we end up with, then my job is to provide the best level of service to the community that I can with the tax dollars we get. And it is our hope, obviously, that doesn't affect the services we provide. But I think that, there's a significant possibility that will be part of it. And that was my fear. Now, in relation to us, there are some independent fire districts that are funded 100% through ad valorem. A friend of mine is chief in Immokalee. He's Immokalee Fire Control District. They're 100% ad valorem taxes. And so, they don't have any other government income to help shore them up. So they're looking at, potentially having to close the doors most likely and hand that service off to the county, who's already going to have a decreased revenue amount. And so I can't imagine that won't have an impact on level of service in areas like that. In our city, I think it depends on where they end up and in discussions with the commission and with the commission listening to the constituents and determining where cuts are made. But, the grass still has to be mowed. We still have to do things to promote growth in the city and stuff like that. So you can't eliminate all parts of other government services, even though we really need to focus on our core services, which would be public safety. There's still other pieces of that need to keep us moving forward as a community.
You used 2 words in there, and I want to address them. Fear is one of them, and then you actually said consequence, and I want to ride those 2 words for a second because I want to throw another word in there, which was transparency, and we have a lot of citizens that don't think we're transparent in our current government. No matter what side you're on, it doesn't matter. People have that tendency right now to want to squash government at any cost because they feel the pressure of every dime that's being spent, not out of their own wallet at times, but even with the taxes they pay, they may not see value in these things. But I want to take the word transparency, throw that with the word fear. And then I want you to talk more about the style of what we're discussing, which is the consequence of what's going to happen, because you're being transparent, I think, beyond what people realize. Because if I'm not mistaken, we talked for a few seconds earlier today and yesterday. Are you standing kind of alone in the Chiefs world with doing this presentation like you are back to your citizens?
Maybe not now. I think there are a lot of other chiefs that are trying to figure this problem out and how it will impact them. Yeah. I can tell you there was I think some reluctance at the state level to ruffle the feathers and hope that this would get worked out. And when I use the word fear, I heard a lot of feedback over the internet and social media, and I take those things with a grain of salt, but there's some reality to that. And there was a lot of people that said, that I'm fear mongering, that I'm being a politician, that I'm trying to, instill fear in people so that they will vote and so that public safety won't be affected. And that's not at all my purpose. When I say that I have fear, when I spoke on the Senate floor at the committee meeting, my fear was that there's not any guardrails in there. There's, this could be different for different communities, and a lot of it depends on how their government reacts to it. What do they have? What abilities do they have to find alternative funding? What abilities do they have, to cut current services and still be able to provide the things that people expect in the city? And that's different from community to community. And then when you look at the demographics of communities, they have different needs. One of the things Northport has always been is we're a bedroom community. And I've always been very, very conscious of the fact that the majority of our services are paid for on the backs of our taxpayers, because we do not have a large commercial base. And one of the things that economic development has really pushed, and I think the city has bought into and realizes, is we have to expand that commercial base to remove some of that burden on the residential taxpayer, but we're not there yet. So my fear is when they did this kind of broad stroke, they took nothing into consideration on the different demographics, how it affects different communities. They didn't look at all, as I said, the rapidity with which Northport has grown is a little bit crazy in comparison to a lot of surrounding communities. And so, yes, our government has grown, and yes, our revenue has grown. But they held the millage rate flat. So obviously on the EMS side of the house, things have become a little bit tighter and a little bit tighter, even though more money came in. But we're dealing with the same thing that I'm dealing with the same thing at home that we deal with at work. Inflationary costs and everything else have become more expensive. So all of those expenses go up for all of us as government services as well. And so to be able to absorb those and to be competitive in the marketplace so that we have good recruitment and are able to have good retention and continue the level of service that we have, those things, they're not inexpensive. So when we look at all of this and we think about, since 2000 and give me a moment here. We started in 2018 bringing on new people, but really the majority of them started hitting 2022 is when we opened up the new station. But since 2022, between 2022 and now, we've added 51 firefighter positions. I have 141 firefighter positions total. That's a 36% increase in firefighters. We didn't add them just willy-nilly. There's the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, has standards that we need to meet for response times that were measured. We're an ISO 1 rated department. It looks at how our department responds. It looks at our communications. It looks at our water supply. They have standards for how quickly you can put a certain number of people on scene of a fire. We're CAS accredited on the ambulance side, which talks a lot about our standards level of service and delivery of care. Our ROSC rate, which is return of spontaneous circulation on the EMS advanced life support side, that's recovering from a cardiac arrest. We're nearly double what the national standard is for cardiac arrest survival rates. Those things are all fantastic, but it requires people, and you have to have stations positioned in such a manner that you can get them to the call within a certain period of time, because seconds and minutes really do count. So had we not added these people, and if we don't continue to add these people and continue to add these stations as we grow, those things will begin to fall off. And there's other consequences to that. Obviously, it can affect whether somebody lives or dies if you can't get a response unit there in an appropriate number of time. So, 4 minutes is when things begin to get a little dicey if you're in cardiac arrest, or if you're having a stroke. You go 6 minutes, and beyond that, you start having death to either the cardiac muscle or the brain tissue without oxygen. At 10 minutes, it's irreversible. So we don't just add people. There's a methodology. When we have developments come on, we do a concurrency study. They apply all of those standards, and they help us determine where a station location needs to be, how it should be staffed, and so that we can try and stay within those response times. And so there's a lot that goes behind it that dictates that growth and how to grow responsibly. And all of that is very difficult too in a community like Northport. When general development community put it all together, you think about the old saying, you can't get here from there because of all of the canals. So if you look throughout the city, our stations are strategically placed along some of those major corridors so they can get to the other roadways relatively quickly, and we try and balance that and do that well enough that we can, meet those standards the most of the time. And as newer areas are developing, we plan ahead and think about, okay, at what point in time do we need to have, a station and units in that location to be able to handle it.
So the reality of a real conversation, I think, is what you're trying to do, versus a controlled vote, or hey, pressure you to think a different way. I said this to my granddaughters earlier. There's a consequence to everything. So if you're going to make a decision, what's the consequence to making the decision? And I gotta say, we're a young community. We have a lot of parents who have kids that go to school, and we say the same things. Grandparents are in town. They say the same things. I don't know where it gets lost when topics like this come into play, because I've never seen, I really never felt like government ever gives you your money back. There always is a catch. I think this is a great safe play for Governor DeSantis. I don't think that there's a bad play on this at all for him, because if you vote yes for it, he's giving you what you want, and he moves on. And if you vote no for it, you've just confirmed you want to be taxed. So it kind of is a win-win for him. Now, take that into consideration and put that in the box.
So I try and stay out of the.
What's the consequence, though, for both sides of that?
Absolutely.
One that stays the same, and the other side of it is there's some really significant consequences that come with the vote. And this would be one of those times where I would say, think about and get educated on how you want to vote, and really dive into it, and don't listen to one side who's trying to drive a message home. Get in there and listen to multiple sources. Do some research. If you were advising people to look at this, how would you tell them to start getting educated? Where should they go? How should they start reading about it?
So the very first thing I'd recommend is there's workshops next week on the budget. I mean, people should go to workshops. You can watch them televised, or you can show up in person, get to understand the budget, call department directors, ask questions, understand how the budget works. And as I said, there's not any fear mongering here. I don't know which services for the city will be impacted or how severely. What I do know is it's a big chunk, and then it becomes a really big chunk in year number 2, and then beyond that it will escalate, based upon what that CPI is. But what are those levels of service that are going to be impacted? And again, I don't have the authority to determine that. So when I went to Tallahassee, it was to advocate overall for the city of Northport, but also for Fire Rescue District. As I said, I think we have a very, very good level of service. I think it's tangible. I don't speak poorly about any of our mutual aid partners, but certainly we're very proud of the level of service that we have. And I don't know that our community wants to be impacted by that. There's a lot of people will say, hey, I don't need the fire service. You can give me a volunteer fire department. I don't need, so many ambulances. You can give me less. We touch about 5% of our population per year. It might be a little bit more than that now, but actually now it's probably about 10%. Some of those are repeat calls. That's such a small portion of the population that is impacted by our services or has actually direct action and relief from us, that it's very easy for people to say, I don't need fire protection, I don't need EMS protection. Our median age has dropped to the point where there are a lot of people that don't need to call 911. We're thankful for that. There are a lot of people that don't have fires. I had a gentleman today that wrote on social media. He said, I've never had a fire. I don't know any of my neighbors that had a fire. I sent him a picture of a fire that we had yesterday, a structure fire. We had a structure fire last week. These things happen. A lot of people just don't know that they happen, and so they don't think it will ever impact them. And our hope is that it never does. Fire prevention services is a part of what we do, and part of that is kind of trying to put ourselves out of service, to teach people about life safety, to make sure that we're out there inspecting all the businesses so the entrances are clear, the exits are clear, there's not obstructions, people can get in and out safely, and so that they're safe for our firefighters if there is a fire there, that they can get in and out, know where those hazards are. So it's difficult to combat that. And some people have come down from up north and they had volunteer fire departments, and I can tell you they're nationwide. Volunteer fire departments are struggling. It's different. Communities are different than what they used to be. And volunteerism, Nokomis Fire Department is where I got my start. And I love this job and career so much, I did it for free for a while. And I'm thankful and blessed to be able to do it for a living. But I never got into it for the money. And the majority of the people that are good at this job and really have a passion for it, that's not what their driving motivation is. But certainly we're happy to be able to make a career out of it and do it. But to advocate and for people to understand, again, being involved in that budget process, because those elected officials, along with cooperation of the city manager and all of us who help formulate the budgets, that's what's going to determine where those cuts are made. Until after that workshop happens next week, that was scheduled long before this happened. This past Monday, this vote happened. Now that we know it's going to referendum, I think there's probably a fairly good chance that it will pass. And again, we're not trying to influence people's votes. We just want them to know there will be an impact. And so if they decide to vote for it and it passes, then what levels of service, like how deep and what can they live without? Some people say IT is not important. Well, the city was, attacked by, we had a cyber issue in the past that caused a significant issue, locked down a bunch of things. And thankfully there was not a huge financial cost to it from the standpoint of they weren't able to get all the city assets, but it certainly did. There was some cost to it, and it was an issue. So you can't eliminate IT. You need to protect those things. You can't not mow grass. People, there's enough complaints about the medians now and things going on and what the city's doing. You can't do that. It affects drainage. It affects other things. And so how deep do you cut? And where is it? You can't, if you close all the parks and there's nothing to go to anymore, then what attracts people to come to the city? So it's a conundrum a little bit, but it'll be a process that we'll have to work through depending on the outcome of the vote and where those things are. And we just want people, again, to understand how the budget works, to make sure that they are a continued process. I understand how people feel about taxes. Quite honestly, I'm an advocate and a fan of tax reform. I just did not like the way this was presented because it didn't have any of the guardrails, and they don't know what the consequences were going to be statewide and how it's going to be impacted. And they kind of said, we're going to do it, and let's let local government figure out how to manage it. And so
you're kind of in a weird spot, and I'm listening to you, and I think people who are open-minded to the conversation are going to hear what you're saying. And I think better structure for how it's being said right now is you kind of know how people are going to vote, but are they aware of the consequences of their vote? Because I think it's going to pass. I don't think people are going to hold back on this at all. And I think that's why it's being presented and pushed so hard so fast. And I think it's something that everybody wants so bad they can taste it. At the same time, just because you can taste it doesn't mean it's going to be a good taste in your mouth when it's done. There's going to be some real strategic plays for our community and others, but if we just stay focused on ours, I heard what you said earlier, and we've got a lot of people in this town that think that commercial is not important, and we've got commissioners right now who are screaming how vitally important it is, and that was before this move. So, does this move make commercial that much more impactful for our community to have?
Well, certainly, because typically commercial has there's a much larger property value, and so that it's not homesteaded or anything like that. So that helps, and that's one of the things to spread it across communities. But I can tell you on the non-ad valorem side, because we don't have a lot of commercial. And because we've done a really good job, we don't run a lot of false alarms and things like that, because our fire marshal has been very diligent about making sure that those systems perform correctly, actually having them changed from their cell phone dialers now instead of direct, so that if in the past, whenever there was a lightning strike close in the area, a lot of times that caused a false alarm. The way those systems are set up now, it doesn't. And because we don't run a lot of calls to those commercial buildings, they're even on the non-ad valorem side, there's not a huge amount of money. A big box store like a Home Depot or a Lowe's pays significantly less money for fire protection in the city than they do, a few miles up the road in Jacaranda for a very similar sized store and company. But it's because our makeup of our community is so much less commercial, and because the amount of impact they have on our services is not significant. Again, that goes back to, there's some legal things that have to be done for you to be able to do collect assessments. And again, assessments aren't going to be affected on this side, but on the tax side too. Most of our services go to residential homeowners and the residential community, and that's both for fire and EMS.
Wow. So there's real conversation to be had on almost every topic that our community, as a young community, continues to grow. And it's, whether we think it's going to slow down or not, it's really not. Can it be managed different? Probably somewhere along the way, some guardrails can be put in to slow down the growth. But it's kind of scary too. If you want to slow down the growth and you don't want to have the movement of taxes, we're at 6 straight years now of no real tax increase other than property taxes. Now, we've had some other strategic increases there, but we haven't been with a commission base for 6 straight years that's gone even after a quarter point jump, which I actually, for the last three election cycles, I've been saying, why can't we bump it a little bit instead of getting walloped? Can't we give an increase to give that and kind of balance the books a little bit? Because you can't always just continue to take away. And now it seems like with this new position that we're being faced with, we've been asked to reduce budgets now for pretty much 6 straight years, or control them differently. Is this one going to be more impactful than all of those put together? Or can it have that effect?
I think time will tell. I think there's potential for that. I think the difficulty is in a lot of people. One, I think that some people that don't understand. So some people don't understand the difference between taxes and assessments on the non-ad valorem side. Then, as I said, the tax bill in Northport says the assessment, the non-ad valorem assessment, says fire rescue, and so everybody thinks that covers the fire department. It doesn't. It just covers the fire portion. It doesn't cover the EMS side of the house. Some people think their tax bill is going away. A lot of the things that you'll see in social media now is, we want to own our homes. We shouldn't have to continue to pay on them. It's going to do these things. Well, the school board, they were carved out of this. So the taxes aren't going to go away. The exact same thing will continue to happen with school board taxes, and still some with ad valorem taxes, but depending on the value of your property, again, as it escalates, eventually a lot of those properties will come off the books if they're under that, $500,000 threshold, however many years it takes to get to that. That impact is going to be significant over time. The one thing, although a lot of people don't like it, at least there was some guardrails in place on how fast the assessment on your property can increase when you pay your taxes. They kind of capped that at 3% a year. As governments look, they're governments, and I'm not talking specifically Northport, because again, I don't have the authority to say what the city of Northport is going to do until we go through the budget process and the elected officials decide what they're going to do with the city management team, and they get feedback. But some of the other things that may be put in place to bring some of that revenue back when it's needed or as it's needed may not have some of those same guardrails in place. And so, that was one of the things I talked about at the Senate too, is again, I'm not opposed to property tax reform. I was opposed to just kind of the way this was done, broad stroke, pushed through quickly, without consideration of the impacts, and then also without consideration of what might be put in its place to replace some of that revenue, and will that have the same guardrails or guidelines, or potentially, there's a lot of articles out there you can go and read and say this isn't really a tax break, it's a tax shift at some point. So
I think it's an adjustment.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some of it will put more money onto the higher value properties, and of course, if you have a lower value property, there's some people that are happy about that, but that won't be sufficient because there's some caps on what governments can do with that too. So as they find other revenue sources, I think that will, potentially impact all of us. And so, again, it's really looking at and getting the whole amount of information, and then being involved in the process and finding out. And again, if people don't want to have certain services, or if they want a reduction in services, then that is entirely up to them to advocate for. And it's our elected officials with the city management team and the city manager that ultimately will make that decision on how that happens. But I would never advocate for a reduction in fire rescue services, because I don't think you can put a price on a life. And I think, even although I certainly don't want to speak for the police department, but I will say I'm in the meetings where they go over their statistics every month, and we have a very, very safe community. And I think people enjoy that, but because they haven't had a cardiac arrest, their house hasn't caught on fire, and maybe their neighbor's house or their own house hasn't been broken into. I think some people think, it's okay if some of those are cut a little bit. They don't know what that impact could be. And if that were to happen, by that time, now we're kind of behind the 8 ball. And so I think we've been there in the past. And as the city's grown, we've tried to be very responsible. On the district side, we do a 10-year plan, and we look at what our needs are, not just for the year that we're in, but what we need for the next 10 years. And every year we adjust that.
I all my life, I've grown up listening to, if you don't vote yes, you're not going to have this. If you don't vote yes, you're not going to have this. Well, it's kind of funny. It's reversed on this one. If you vote yes, you may not have these things. And we don't, because again, I'm going to use your words, and it's really their actions. If there were no guardrails put into place for just the public safety side of things, it's funny that they carved out schools. Okay, well, that's education. Okay, now we're talking public safety. Okay, I would rather have better public safety than I would better schools, because there's alternatives to schools, private schools, whatever you want to go to. So there's the alternative. What is our alternative for our fire department? Are we going to reduce fire down to? I don't think we'll ever be a volunteer force. God help us. We're at 104 square miles and growing, potentially. That's it. Almost. I don't want to use the word fear. I'm going to go back to the word consequence, because if we don't start using the right phrasing for some of this, it's going to shut people off to a conversation. And I think conversations need to be had by everyone at this point, whether you're for it or against it. Think of the solution side of it. I think that's the hardest part that you guys are facing right now. Is I don't know that you've been given a roadmap of possible solutions. You're waiting on.
I think, you're right. And I think until obviously the city's, I'm sure they've had discussions this week. I've not been privy to them, but I'm sure there are discussions going on right now on strategy or things to think about, or what do we do? And again, I'll go back to, I'm not fear mongering. I don't know that fire rescue services will be impacted, but I also don't know that they won't. But some of the other services that could be, what are those impacts, and how deep are those cuts? And so that's why I say everybody, regardless, they need to be informed. Some people, I heard actually a gentleman you and I both know. He posted something on social media the other day, and he actually had a proposition that sounded in theory great, and said, maybe we could do a 1 cent or a half cent sales tax to help, shore up public safety services in lieu of this. And unless there was legislative changes, surtax cannot be used for operational needs. So can't pay personnel or operational costs with surtax money. Those are for capital projects and programs. Our fire station, I saw some things on social media about the fire station that's being rebuilt, on City Center Boulevard right there off of Sumter.
Yep.
And there are people that don't believe that it was more reasonable and appropriate to build a new station as opposed to remodel the old one. Well, we went through those steps, and it absolutely was. And could we put up a lean-to and a mobile home? I suppose we could for a lot less money. But what do we do when there's a storm or there's an impact? Our personnel need to be able to operate out of that. And when the storm, they need to be safe. We call people back. We call sometimes all 3 shifts. So we have 3 times the amount of people in that station when we have a hurricane come, and they're all in lockdown. They're all making plans. They're all getting ready to be deployed as soon as the storm passes to go out and serve the community. We staff all of the vehicles. We upstaff everything, and then we're running 24 hours a day units and rotating people to keep that operation going. And the only way we're able to do that is if they can be housed safely in those stations as the storm passes. We call them in, because if they were somewhere else and the storm passes, I don't have any guarantee that they can get back to work, depending on where the storm was, what the impact was in their area, if they were flooded, if they had to leave to protect their family. There's no expectation that we can recall them when something like that happens. So you call people into work, you lock them down, you hold them, and that's something that we all committed to do, that some people really don't take into consideration. But again, those projects, that station, the majority of that station was funded through surtax monies as capital monies. It's not something that you can use to pay for personnel or operational costs.
You talked a little bit about this before. You're trying to prevent and cause yourself to go out of business. I think the police department works at it just as hard as you do. And I've got a great relationship with everyone at City Hall. I think this is a dangerous time, because you are going to give the citizens what they want, which is a reduction. There's going to be consequences, and they're going to, I think, be satisfied with any consequence that comes to their government, whether it's local, state, or federal. And I'm not sure that they're ready for the full impact of that decision, because the words that you say, until it affects them. Well, I will guarantee you there were a lot of citizens who, when the flooding was happening, were very appreciative of the services that were being provided and that were organized. That is part of public safety, the EOC, and how that was handled. And when we had the hurricanes, we are a different community with 80 miles of canals. You know this firsthand. I talked to you in the EOC, and you were out on the roads when you were not on your shift. You were actually in a vehicle going out and surveying the land. You yourself, chief, out there doing your due diligence to, check on the safeguards of our community. I think those are the things that get overlooked. I think because they're just assumed they're going to be there. Some of these things can have a direct impact if these budgets aren't met. And this, I think this is a fundamental change of taxes that is coming down from above. I think it's going to have a direct impact to our communities. I think we're going to have to find different solutions. But my question would be, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but can this be gosh, I don't even know if I'm going to ask this right. So there was a structure within how that monies came in and how it was divvied out. Is this a possible restructuring of over time of that money being more accessible to local government to spend appropriately within their own communities?
I think obviously, I think everybody in the community, whether they have some caution on this and whether they vote for or against, I think everybody would agree with. I think that's the purpose of it. I think the purpose of it is to, I think there's a view that there's a large amount of government waste and overspending. I will tell you that when you, if I can take a moment here and put my glasses on so I can read this to you, John. One of the comments, and I heard it several times, they talked about, Doge should come down here and take care of this. And I'll say, and one of the things that I kind of want to refer everybody to, and I'll give the website later, but if you go to the city of Northport, I'll give the website. You can put questions on there, and there's information on there regarding this, how it potentially impacts us as far as money goes. And one of the areas on it says applying Doge in Northport. And so the city actually, they met everything that Doge had asked of them and everything, although Doge never actually came down to the city. They applied Doge's formula that they used everywhere else. So they took fiscal year 2020 budget, multiplied by the population growth, multiplied by 26% inflationary factor, and they said what the fiscal year 2025 expected budget should be. And so the population growth over that period of time was 30.8%. The inflationary factor, again, it was 26%. The fiscal year 20 citywide adopted budget was 175 million and change. The Doge expected budget for fiscal year 25 was 288,925 and 925 679. The Northport citywide adopted budget for fiscal year 25 was 288 510 770. So it was about $400,000, a little more than $400,000 under what Doge would have expected it to be had they applied those things. So, and again, if you look back, a lot of that is tied to growth. And, the old saying, some people think growth pays for growth, and unfortunately, it doesn't. Eventually, it catches up, growth settles down. There's kind of a period where there's this catch-up period and things kind of settle. But we have been in this constant state of growth, which has absolutely placed a pretty high demand on government services to provide the level of services this community has come to expect, and that's really been it. So there's really would tell everybody there's frequently asked questions on here. It shows statistics on population growth in the fiscal year versus the number of full-time equivalent employees that we have in the city. How Doge applies is some great information, and I would say it talks about potential service impacts, deferred maintenance of facilities and infrastructure. I think the city's been dealing with that for years. I think we've talked about how much money there is in infrastructure costs that we are not able to fund. We can't borrow money. And if we do borrow money, we have to be able to free up the amount of money to be able to pay back that debt for facilities and infrastructure. Some of the other potential service impacts are reduced capacity for capital projects. We're already dealing with that now because the majority of the surtax money, a ton of it went to the widening of the Price Boulevard, which has needed to happen for years and years and years. But that pushed a lot of our projects off with the same amount of money that we had them originally budgeted for. But there was no money left to add money to them in consideration of what those future costs would be. So a lot of our future projects are already underfunded. Reduced staffing and service levels in quality of life programs, facilities maintenance, planning and development, cybersecurity, potentially adjusted support functions for police, fire, emergency services, adjusted emergency management, disaster response capabilities. It goes on and on. And I'm sure that they will be, one of the things they say on here is exploring the creation of special assessments, such as Parks and Rec assessments, infrastructure and community development districts, maybe a dedicated EMS village. So, the city is going to make sure that we can maintain for the safety of the community. It's what's the initial impact going to be, and is there going to be a dip? And I think there will be a dip felt somewhere in the city that somebody says, wow, we didn't know what that impact was going to be. And if it's not in public safety, which I pray that it's not, it could be other areas that maybe we don't think about every day, but are just as important.
Well, and I love the fact that you brought the Doge part in, because there's a lot of people out there throwing that around, and I love the fact that you read it. They won't read it. They won't believe that you said it. And even if they read it, they're not going to believe it because Doge wasn't here. There is that group of people that just believes if the big government doesn't actually show up in Northport, which the odds of that are not real high, they've especially if you meet the criteria. If we didn't meet the criteria, it would have been a whole different ballgame, because those numbers would have been off. What do you say to the people? And you just read it, and you know what you guys have to go through for getting that information to the federal government to get in the hands of Doge. Is that transparent? Were they transparent when they gave that information?
Was the federal government transparent?
Was our government transparent when we provided that information to the system so that it could see it? Our numbers were $400,000 short.
Yeah.
I gotta imagine that if we were $400,000 short of the goal that Doge said we should have, that automatically gave us sort of a good start to their review.
Yeah, and although I don't do those numbers are figured out by the finance department, and they have to do all that stuff. And certainly, if you look at their track record of the awards that they get every year for their accounting and their budgeting and things like that, those numbers are good. That's what the budgets were. And so you can look at the Doge formula and you can plug those numbers in, the inflationary costs and the population growth. And again, that was one of the reasons why I went and spoke to the Appropriations Committee, the Senate Appropriations Committee, in hopes that they would either put amendments in or stop this until they could find out what that impact was in all of the different communities. Because when you put it across the entire state with a broad stroke like that, I will tell you there are not a lot of communities that have the same residential makeup that we do, where it's just kind of a bedroom community, and certainly not any others that are growing, or not many others that are growing at the rate that we are. And when you apply both of those things with the population growth that we've had and that increase of services to be able to provide for all those things I talked about, so that we maintain proper response times, proper staffing, and things like that, we're not out of whack with where we should be. So, there's a lot of negativity and a lot of comments, and people get very heated, and I completely understand that. They get upset when they think you're trying to take money out of their pocket. And again, I go back to and just have to reassure everybody, I have no intention of fear mongering, and I'm not advocating whether they should vote for or against. I am advocating that everybody become as educated as you can, and whatever way you decide to vote, then please also be a part of the budget process and make sure you let your elected officials know, as they begin talking, because there's going to be, I'm sure, public meetings about what services will be affected, what that level of effect will be, and be vocal about, whether they're okay with that or not, or shift that burden or do some of those things. And so, that's going to take some time and take through a process. So somebody can't just sit at the keyboard one night and send out a comment and walk away and vote no. I mean, they can, but one way or the other, how that impact is determined, I would encourage them all to continue to be involved in that process. And certainly, I've been here for a long time. I'm very blessed to have been and worked for the city. I love the city for 32 plus years. And, I want to retire feeling comfortable and leaving knowing that what we've put into place, that we're a whole lot better service than we used to be, and a whole lot better than a lot of other services. I took some shots, and the department took some shots over me going to the Senate and doing that. And again, I think some people thought that I was advocating or telling them how they should vote. I wasn't, but I will say we worked very hard to have the level of service that we do. I'm incredibly proud and honored to represent the men and women of the fire department for the job that they do. They're extraordinary. We are in the process of getting accredited on the fire side. We're already accredited on the ambulance side, and we're an ISO 1. And I can tell you there's less than 1% of the fire departments in the country that have ISO 1. There's less than 1% of the fire departments or ambulance services that have CAS accreditation, which we have, and less than 1% of the fire departments that have CFAI, which is national fire accreditation. And
what does that mean? What does that mean to us, the citizens and the taxpayers?
What it means is all of those things, and the reason we pursue those, and I talk to our personnel about it a lot. It's not about putting a sticker on the side of the truck. It's about letting our community know that the service that we provide, that we're using national standards and benchmarks that are appropriate to show them that our service levels are at the very highest level, and what the expectations they should be for the services they get, so that the money that they spend on our services, they should feel good about that we are meeting and exceeding all of those standards. And there's not even a percentage. I have yet to find, looking online, I can't find any reference to a percentage of how many departments have all three of those things. And I think, our hope is that we can continue to finish that process. And we're supposed to have a site visit sometime this summer, and then go in front of the accreditation board in spring next year. And then we will have an ISO 1. We will be CFAI accredited and have CAS ambulance accreditation. And to me, that is something that our community should be able to look at and go, it really doesn't get any better than that.
And there's a lot of pride that goes into that from your team, and the dedication to accomplish those things. That starts at the top, but you cannot be the only one working on this project.
I promise you I'm not. As a matter of fact, I have staff that works on these things, and it's from the very newest person and the job that they do. So the administrative function of putting these things together is filing the paperwork and adjusting the policies and making sure all those things are done. But it's the people on the street every day. It's the men and women in Northport Fire Rescue that are running the calls. Those are the ones that truly make it possible, because if they weren't doing all of the amazing things that they're doing, it wouldn't really matter what paper we put together, because we wouldn't be meeting those standards. We wouldn't be looking at those benchmarks. It would be very difficult to be at the level that we are if it didn't start from the very bottom all the way up. I can tell you it is the lion's share of the department that does that work, and I've got some administrative staff that certainly work hard at it too. It is not our primary function, but it does take an effort to do that, to get it and to maintain it. But the value of that is showing this community that those are the service levels that we're providing.
Well, we're a little after the 55-minute mark, and I want to thank you for the acceptance of the invite to do this. I think it's something that we need to get out there and at least have the discussions more live interaction. And I think we're going to set up a Friday for another special show with you. Maybe you can get a special guest to come on with you, and kind of widen the scope to see. I think what the citizens have questions about. I think the best thing you can do as a citizen right now is to write your comments, write your questions down. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid of the answer you're going to get. Because you're going to vote how you're going to vote, and the realization of having this conversation, and I think Chief Titus and myself are having this dialogue right now with the utmost assurance that this thing is going to pass. Unless people completely change their mind, I think you need to make sure that you're well aware of the consequence of the vote. This time, you're not voting for a person. You're literally voting for consequences. Either way, your consequences, you're going to stay with the taxes as they are, or the consequences are now we got to figure out a way to pay for services, and we got to let it roll downhill. If that doesn't scare you, it would scare you in your own household. If you took a job that you had to wait to see what was going to happen. That's kind of where we're at right now, is the wait and see.
And I'm trying to, John, stay away from the word scare, but you're right. I'm staying away from it because a lot of the pushback that we've gotten on social media, and we're not trying to scare anybody. We just want them to be educated and then be vocal about where those cuts are going to be if they decide to make that vote and if it passes. So one of the things I said earlier that I would share with you, and if you allow me,
sure.
I encourage everybody to visit northportfl.gov/ property tax. That's where some of the information that I pulled for Doge and some of those other questions come from, that information there. There's also a quick button on there. If people want to ask questions, we'll make sure that they get answers. And then, of course, they can send questions to you, John, and we'll set up time to answer some of those. And depending on that content, I may bring along a special guest if there's somebody that can answer those questions better than I, because, again, I don't have the authority to determine the direction that the city goes. Ultimately, when our elected officials determine what our budget's going to be, my job is to figure out how to provide the best level of service, certainly that we can with the funds that we have. One thing I did want to clear up really quick before we go, I know we're at the end of our time. The last thing that was I saw quite a bit of was, I know that there are some governmental entities that say, as your year goes on, at the end of your year, use it or lose it. Use your money or you lose it. That is absolutely 100% not true in the city of Northport. We have not expended our budget in the fire department on either side. Well, not as long as I've been the fire chief, and I'm not sure before. I can't remember ever having operated in the red. We are able to balance our budget between, operations and personnel. So if we had a bad storm year and we went over a little bit on personnel, we're able to balance that by not spending in some other areas. But we have always returned money back. When it's on the district side, that money goes back into our reserve fund and then is used in the calculations. Remember, I talked about the 10-year plan. We look at what's in our reserves. We look at what our future needs are in the upcoming year. And then we determine what our rates need to be to keep us fiscally solvent, as time goes on. So we don't have these giant spikes or anything like that. It's kind of a steady climb. And it's the same thing on the general fund side for the EMS. When we don't expend that money, and believe you me, the city manager has been absolutely an advocate of don't spend your money. He's in advance every year saying, looking at as we come closer to the end of the year, if you have savings in a certain account, his expectation is you're going to have money at the end of the year left over, and that's being turned back in, and then they utilize that as they form the following year's budget. So there is absolutely not a use it or lose it mentality for the city. That is not how it works. And I just wanted to clear that up before we go. But I thank you so much for inviting me tonight. I enjoy all of our conversations. Obviously, this topic is near and dear to all of us who are taxpayers, who live in the city, who provide services. And we just want to see the city continue to provide the services, keep the community safe at the level that it does now. And hopefully we get some guidance on how we do that moving forward from our taxpayers, because that's. And I'm
going to say it out loud so that everybody hears me. I love the fact that we're talking about tax cut. On a personal level, I love it. Absolutely. I also understand in the conversations I've been blessed to have with city staff and city leadership, that the fear, and I use that word because it's mine. I'm going to own that fear. As far as I want the tax cut, but I fear what's coming, because you just can't shift money away and not expect something to be shortchanged. It just doesn't happen. I know that I'm speaking the truth, and those who know I'm speaking the truth are the majority of the people that we're talking to right now. But that's still not going to change people's minds. But just be prepared for what's coming, because you should be involved in the consequence of the vote.
The hope is that they help us architect what that outcome is, and what that they help define and make sure that they define and voice what services are that need to be maintained or understand, and if there is an impact that they're not happy with, then we'll need to make adjustments in the following years with their help and support. So
I just got to tell you, if you're not willing to get involved in local government now, you should be scared to death, because it's coming down to the local government to fix the problems that the above are sending our way. And like I said, there's no lose for Ron DeSantis in putting this on the ballot. But the voters themselves really need to sit back and analyze and understand that if they vote one direction, they better be prepared for the consequence. And they should get involved. Like you said, get involved, get in the nitty gritty, understand the processes, and then let your voices be heard. That's the power of the voices, are they're coming our way. So just be prepared for it. So I thank you for this. I learned a lot from you tonight, and I look forward to a lot more conversations about it, so that we can maybe have some great dialogue along the way. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it very much, John. Thank you. Thanks again for having me on the show, and I look forward to seeing you and talk to you when I get back. And to all of you in the community, thank you for your support, and we look forward to hearing your voice.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
And join us next Monday. Commissioner David Duval will be on, and we'll have a great conversation with him, I'm sure, because we may be continuing this same dialogue. So talk to you soon.